Good evening, everybody. It's 7 o'clock by my clock, so we're probably going to go ahead and get started here. We'd like to welcome you guys to our first webinar, weather webinar. We're excited to be able to do this. We're grateful that Brian is willing, and I'll continue to let some folks in as we continue on. But since it's 7, I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to Brian and let him take it away. Brian, go ahead.
All right, guys, thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. So periodically we're going to do these not only videos, but webinars to kind of set the table for not only what's happening right now, but kind of what I expect as we go forward in this. Obviously, a lot of the weather that's been happening is very top of mind. We had a record wet December in places, and then we followed that up by a record dry January in a lot of places. And so far this month, things have been pretty terrible as well. But in the grand scheme of things, this is kind of what we were warning about when I was releasing this information back in the fall, simply because I knew we weren't going to be in a good spot for a lot of us. And I'll kind of reiterate that fact a little bit as we go over the next several minutes, but also tell you how things are going to be changing going forward as well. So I think we'll go ahead and do this. I want to go over the past 12 months here. And this is a Pacific Decadal Oscillation. So it's a PDO, and you hear me talk about this a great deal in terms of the positive and negative phases. Well, you can see for the last year, the PDO has not only been negative, but really since about the fall, especially in October, we have seen PDO readings that are as negative as they have been back in the 50s. And that's saying something. We are dealing with a weather pattern that was obviously causing a great deal of drought for a lot of us. So if we're talking about a scenario that in the atmosphere is responding to drought, you don't have to look too much farther than this graphic right here in front of you and what has happened over the past year. So that is one thing that is working against us and has been working against us for quite some time. The Atlantic has a very similar oscillation, and you can see that it's been, I took this all the way back to 1854, I believe it was, just to give you a broader scale about the Atlantic, but you can see the warm and the cold phases by the blue and the red spikes right there. And the Atlantic changes a little less frequently than the Pacific does, but over the past several months, the Atlantic has been in a very positive phase, as you can see right there on the graphic. So what does that mean? It means something like this, that when you're talking about corresponding drought anomalies with the different phases of the PDO and the AMO, you get a map that looks like this. Now, we are situated in the lower right-hand portion of your screen. The PDO is negative, the AMO is positive. So where you're seeing all the red, that's where drought is at a heightened frequency. Where you're seeing the blues, not so much. And while this isn't necessarily a perfect roadmap for what is occurring, I say it has done a pretty good job, because where the drought has been the most persistent and has been the nastiest, there's a great deal of red there, extending from Texas all the way up to the Four Corners and obviously a large part of California. Now, historically speaking, when the PDO is negative, that favors a wetter than average period in the Pacific Northwest. We saw that at times back in the fall and continuing through December, but recently things have shut off at a great deal, not just for California, but really across the majority of the West Coast and a large part of the Western United States. So I think this graphic really helps to tell the story for producers, simply because while it isn't exact, and it isn't going to be exact all the time, or maybe even half the time, it paints a picture of what should happen with the particular phases of the PDO and the AMO. So again, lower right is where we're situated, and we don't have a real good shot of pulling out of that, at least in the near term. So that kind of reinforces the dry signal. And this is what's happened over the past 30 days, where you're seeing all the browns and the reds. That's the anomaly in inches during the past 30 days. So there are places there in California during the past 30 days that are running at a 7 to 11 inch deficit in terms of moisture. You missed January in the wet season in California and across the Pacific Northwest, and it really sets you back. So in terms of December, there was some hope that December would be wet for some folks. Well, December was wet for a lot of us, but we just simply knew it wasn't going to last that much longer. And you can see why, how things have radically shut off in the western portion of the United States. And that continues all the way eastward into western portions of Colorado, where they have been struggling after a wet December. So to miss out on 2 months during the wet season for California is definitely not a good thing in any really part of the West. Sea surface temperature anomalies, obviously we still have the La Nina going strong. It's right here off the west coast of South America. We also have that cold pool in the Gulf of Alaska. These two things are changing, however. They are weakening somewhat, especially the La Nina episode. So this is an animation since late November of sea surface temperature anomalies, again, right at the surface. You can see the blue has not only been shrinking in size, but also in magnitude. It's not completely going away. It's still there. It's still holding on there in the Eastern Pacific Ocean, but it is a lot different than what it was back during the fall. And I think that that is something that's significant, not just at the surface, but also beneath the surface here. This is an animation that goes from the top down in the ENSO region of the Pacific Ocean. So from 0 all the way down to 450 meters. On the right side of the graph is over near Australia. On the left side of the graph is over on Australia. Over on the right side, it's off the west coast of South America. So you can not only see the blue again shrinking in size, but magnitude, but it's being replaced by all of that red and orange, and that is warmer than average water that is making its way eastward across the Pacific Ocean, not just at the surface, but also beneath the surface. And if you were paying attention to what I was talking about last fall, I was talking about how I thought that this La Nina event would not only go away, but eventually would be replaced by an El Nino event later this year. This particular graphic reinforces that thinking because that warmer than average water is not only pooling, but it is expanding across a large part of the central Pacific Ocean. And that paves the way for this oceanic and this atmospheric change that will likely take place later this year. So that kind of is the long and the short of it right now as far as the La Nina is concerned. And the computer model information, and again, this is from mid-January. The next map will be upgraded here in mid-February, but you can see all of these models for the most part pull us out of La Nina and take us back to near neutral as we head into late spring and into early summer. And I think they might even be doing that a little bit too slowly in the grand scheme of things. So I think the transition might actually be taking place sooner than maybe what some of the models have been advertising, and I've been seeing that take place now over the past couple of months or so. So again, at least something that's going to produce some variability going forward, which is obviously important. Now, again, that variability isn't going to change in the next couple of weeks. This is computer model projections for precipitation anomalies, again, above or below average over the next 2 weeks. And again, all of that brown and red situated across California, the Pacific Northwest, and a large part of the Western United States is a testament to the pattern that is locked in and has been continued to be reinforced. So especially for California, you miss out on the first half of February. It's going to take some miracle type stuff to really change the pattern by the late month to really salvage any part of February. Can we do that? Sure. It only takes one storm or a series of storms to do that. But right now, the deck is stacked against that from actually taking place going forward. I'm going to show you some evidence going forward that we might break that pattern. But as far as February is concerned, unless we see something dramatically change the pattern, this will be the second consecutive dry month and dry in a major league fashion. If we go to, oops, I'm not really sure why that happened, but get back to where it was. Oh boy. Well, guys, it looks like it kicked me out here. So bear with me while I get back here. Sorry about that.
Brian, while you're working on that, I'll just let everybody know we
Go
are
ahead.
going to go ahead and give you a chance to ask some questions at the end of this if you want to. So as we're going along here, write down any questions you guys might have for Brian. And I apologize, I forgot to introduce myself. My name's Ross Bronson. I'm with Red Summit Advisors, as you can tell, and I'm their an agent, but also the kind of ag risk consultant, and that's kind of why I'm here as part of our risk management plan and the way we can help you guys manage your risk on your operations. So,
Sorry about that, Ross. I'm not sure why it kicked me out, but I'm getting back in here. So just bear with me
sure.
a second here.
Charles, will you spin that spaghetti, please?
Okay. We should be back up here. There we are. Can you guys hear me okay still?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a computer model that takes into account what March is going to look like. And as I said, well, I thought February might be a lost cause for a large part of California and the Pacific Northwest. I think there's at least a little bit of reason for optimism as we head into the month of March. Now, this particular model is the North American Multi-Model Ensemble. It's a conglomerate of models that are essentially looking at the same thing. Green, wetter than average, brown, drier than average, and white is obviously average. So you can see at least the northern third northern half of California is dealing with what would possibly be wetter than average conditions during the month. And I think that there's at least a good shot that that could happen, especially the farther north you go. Now, California, at least in the southern part, might have a real problem again. And you can see drier than average conditions likely spreading out across the Four Corner states and parts of Colorado during that time. If we look at April again, winding down the wet season in the west.
Brian, we just lost your audio. I don't know if it's just on my end.
I can't hear him either.
Okay. I'll text him real quick in case he can't hear me.
Would it be possible, Brian, to go back a slide?
You wanted to go back to like the March slide?
Yeah, I missed that and it was choppy on my end.
Okay. Yeah, he's we're working on his his audio, and then I'll have him go back and kind of revisit that.
Thank you.
Hang tight, folks. I think he's working his way back into the meeting, looks like.
Sorry about that, guys. Can you hear me again?
Yes, sir. We got you back. And then did you hear? Yeah, it looks like you're headed back to March. We had a request to go through March one more time.
Yeah, my goodness. I'm not sure what's going on with the tech stuff tonight. But anyway, my apologies for that. But yeah, we can go back here to March. And you can see where the green is showing up across California, Pacific Northwest, parts of the Northern Rockies. That essentially favors a storm track with storms coming in from the Pacific, maybe not necessarily making it all that far south, though. You see southern Nevada, California, Arizona, across New Mexico, Colorado. That drought signal, or at least that dry signal, is fairly stout right there. If you read the legend below, you can see some of those brown shadings are running between about 60 and 70% chance that there will be below average precipitation in those areas. So I think the farther north you live, certainly during the month of March, is going to favor a better scenario in terms of, at least getting some average moisture and probably above average. You can see that wet signal is pretty stout up there across parts of the Pacific Northwest. But as I was mentioning with April, it basically starts to wind down in terms of the wet season is concerned. Some residual effects possible in the Pacific Northwest, but average to drier than average conditions looks to be in the cards for most of California, extending eastward across the Four Corner states. Again, that's for April. If we look at May, this is the interesting thing to me. So remember how I was talking about the likely transition to an El Nino episode later this year. When we start to see that take shape, the dry signal starts to migrate northward during the middle part of the year. That includes Northern California, up into the Pacific Northwest, parts of the Northern Rockies. So while the stoutest part of that dry signal is favoring the Four Corner states, farther south, you can see the change definitely taking place right there. And where you're seeing the white over the Southwest, don't misunderstand that, oh, that must just be average right next to the below average. No, that is dry off the scale. Okay. So a stout dry signal because of this El Nino that is possibly going to materialize later starts to make its way farther north and to the northwest. You can see it up there over the northern portion of the Rockies, the Pacific Northwest during the month of July. This particular model does not hint that much at a monsoon, but again, there could possibly still be one, and I definitely wouldn't write that off. And then as we head into August, things start to moderate a little bit in terms of that dry signal. And I would say that's probably because we will have at least some type of a monsoonal pattern set up across the west and the southwestern United States. So again, this is from the NMME model right here. We can also look at the Euro seasonal model, and we're looking at the same thing. We're looking at precipitation chances here, and this is for the month of March. So greens and blues, wetter than average, browns, drier than average. And if you look over California, the Pacific Northwest, parts of the Northern Rockies, it's very similar to the NMME, where the farther north and west you live, the better prospects you're going to have of seeing moisture, depending on where you're located, with large part of Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Texas getting shut out, at least in terms of above average precipitation. And I wouldn't be surprised that this happens simply because the way the jet stream is going to be structured coming in off the Pacific Ocean, I think it's probably going to end up leaving a lot of the Southwest out of the cards. Does that mean that those areas won't see any storms? No, it doesn't mean that. It just simply means that the frequency of moisture producing storms will likely be reduced. This is for the month of April from this particular model. And again, both of these models are fresh. They just came out over the past couple of days with the latest data. So you can see it paints an average to drier than average scenario across a large part of the West and across the Western High Plains states for the month of April. This is for the month of May. And again, I know we're getting out of the wet season across parts of the West where we basically get shut out, but it's still painting that drier than average signal for a large part of the West, and a pretty stout one going up in the nation's midsection from Dallas northward through Oklahoma City, Wichita, and across the Western High Plains. It's one of those things too. The areas that are dry right now, given the way the pattern is stacked, are probably still going to stay dry, at least for a while longer. So as we go into June, you don't see that break a whole lot across the nation's midsection. This would be a terrible scenario that they would not only miss out on the late season, the late winter moisture of March and April, but we would roll into the thunderstorm season and have problems. You can see the same dry signal that was migrating north and northwestward on the NMME model is doing the same thing here in the Euro seasonal model. For July, there's the monsoon that starts to show up coming out of Mexico through Arizona, New Mexico, and Southwest Colorado. Some of that will likely impact Southeast California. It usually does so with that, but that's the first hint of the monsoon pattern trying to set up right there, while areas in the Pacific Northwest, Idaho, Wyoming, Montana are dealing with that pre-El Nino inflicted dryness that many times can develop. We look at August, pretty much the same story. You've got the monsoon pattern going up in the south and southwest, and average to drier than average conditions the farther west and northwest you go. So both of these models are painting a pretty similar scenario. And at this range, and by range, I'm saying, dealing with months away, for them to be in that type of agreement means that they're looking at a pretty solid signal that it is dictating that type of agreement. Usually you don't see something like that at that range, but we're seeing that right now. This other computer model I want to show you, this is from last month. It'll be updated here in about 8 days or so, but it is painting for February, March, April, a very similar type setup. Southeast California, across the desert Southwest, up through the Western High Plains, drier than average conditions. Pacific Northwest, parts of the Northern Rockies do okay. And then if we look at April, May, June, there's the dry signal that not only intensifies, but continues to spread farther to the north and northwest. So in my mind, we have a very narrow window of opportunity for some of us to capitalize on what could be a pattern change and at least allow some variability in here during late February or as we head into March. Now, I think some areas of the West are going to have real problems right through February, but even farther east, maybe parts of Colorado, New Mexico, into Texas and Kansas, there's a storm system coming through next week that might actually do some good. But areas farther west, I think, are going to struggle because our weather pattern is not coming in off of the Pacific right now. It is dropping southward out of Canada. Real tough to get moisture producing storms with that type of setup. So in terms of the West right now and its outlook, while December was pretty amazing and helped erase a lot of the exceptional dryness, we're still dealing with some really nasty and large deficits across parts of the West. And I think because of the way the pattern is stacked, at least right now, it will take a very, very wet March in a lot of those areas to erase what has been going on. And that's kind of my thoughts, my closing thoughts of that. And while La Nina is going away, that negative PDO is still going to be driving our weather for a while until that changes. While we will see more pattern variability, the storms have to be much more frequent and actually produce, and that hasn't happened recently. And I want to underscore that miracle March, that's what a large part of California needs. And I'm not convinced at all that the entire state is going to get it. I think the northern part definitely stands the best shot. I still think that El Nino probably develops late this year. That typically benefits southern areas with a better storm track, while northern areas start to see more dryness. So I know this is a lot of information, and I know that there are a lot of variables in there, but in terms of my thoughts, that's kind of what I'm thinking right now. And they haven't changed a whole lot. Even when all hell was breaking loose in December with that pattern in the mountains, keep this in mind. Mammoth Mountain in California had 170 inches of snow in the month of December. They had 0 inches of snow in January. The whiplash effect there back and forth, that just didn't happen in those 2 months. October was wet, followed by a dry November, followed by that record December, followed by a dry January, and into February. So the consistency of the moisture just isn't there right now with the pattern. And that's kind of my main message right now.
Great. Thanks, Brian. I guess I shouldn't say great since we're forecasting a lot of dry weather, but is there anybody who's on right now that'd like to ask Brian any specific questions concerning kind of to clarify what you've heard or anything like that?
I've got a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So when we went through those slides, Brian,
Yes.
it looked as though there's obviously pretty grim all the way through August. One of the things that you said is storms are still coming, just few and far between. Is that kind of what the expectation is? So there's still a chance of some moisture, but overall we're going to be under.
But where specifically are you talking about for what area?
I'm in New Mexico,
Man, which part?
Central.
Central. Yeah, I mean, that's the problem. I mean, with the way the jet's structured right now, it's pretty bleak, coming down from the Northwest. I mean, we had a good little snow event last week here in Eastern Colorado, but you know what, that snow had about zero moisture content. It was fluff, and that's because of the direction the storm is coming from, right out of Canada. So you're dealing with cold air, and snow that's produced in cold air just doesn't have any good moisture. It beats 60-mile-an-hour wind out of the west, but there's no staying power with something like that. So as we enter into late winter and in the spring, yeah, the seasonal change usually always precipitates more frequent storms. But what side of the storm track are you going to be on? If you're in New Mexico, you're south of where I am, and southern Colorado right now is looking pretty bleak as far as that forecast goes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I know we're looking at this for projections, but in terms of Red Summit, is there any more staying power with regards to this? Meaning, looking at the projection as a producer, you're thinking, okay, it's time to start seriously thinking about cutting back or calling and doing things of that nature. Is there anything that Red Summit offers with regards to looking into those projections, if you will, or things of that nature, or not at this time?
In regards to interpretation of maybe action after hearing all this, is that kind of what you're thinking?
Yeah. Is there any projection? Like, obviously we don't want to overstep and have people, but is there a deeper dive into it that maybe we can look at as producers, and maybe Red Summit's going to look at as well?
So that's a great question, and in some ways that's kind of what my role is going to be, or is with Red Summit, is to maybe, if you have some specific questions for you and your operation and how this looks for you, and maybe helping you think, sometimes it's hard to get out of the emotion of it when it's your land and your love. Those are some things that we're going to look at, and we're going to be putting out some, in fact, I just sent one over to our marketing team today. We're going to be putting out some, I don't know if you would call it literature, but some information to just kind of get you thinking a little different maybe about how you're going to approach this situation. I would say that, I mean, if you're thinking that it's time to start looking at what you're going to do about it, I would say that's wise, because it's always better to be ahead of the curve. But I guess in direct answer to your question, yeah, give us a call, kind of let us know what your concerns are, what you kind of want to look at, and I think we're willing to dive into that a little bit more as much as we can.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone else have some questions? It's kind of hard to come up with very many questions when it's fairly definitive information, But
Well,
go ahead,
Ross,
Brian.
I would also, want to encourage folks too. This is something that is fluid. I do these types of updates every month, just simply because to make a forecast and look at these models and see what's happening and going long term and not allowing for any type of changes to take place, I think is very foolish. So while the situation looks pretty dire right now for a lot of areas, even I keep in mind this is weather. We can turn this on a dime if we can break the pattern. Now, as a scientist, you have to look at all the forensic evidence here, and there are a lot of negative pieces of evidence here that would suggest we will immediately snap into a wet weather pattern. Now, as I said, if there are areas that are more likely to see that pattern change that would benefit from a wetter than average pattern, I just simply think that those are areas that are going to be favoring, as I said, the northern third of California, the Pacific Northwest, parts of Idaho, Montana. Just simply the way the jet is going to be structured. I think places like southern Utah, Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico are going to be on the southern side of that storm track, which usually favors more wind than anything, usually favors drier than average conditions more than anything. And you have to get really lucky to get a storm in there that can actually be meaningful. Can it happen? Sure. But when you're talking about making a long range forecast and you're looking at all these things over here that are pointing against something like that, especially regarding frequent moisture producing storms, I hate bad news as much as the next person, but I would certainly rather know what is potentially coming versus be completely in the dark. So, an update that we do next month on something like this, could there be something different? Sure. Am I optimistic that it'll be different for all of this region? Absolutely not.
Yeah, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the other thing to keep in perspective is we are talking averages and compared to average. So although we're talking less than average in a large part of this, and in some cases significantly less than average, that doesn't mean zero per se.
That's right. There will be storms, especially as we go through the spring, but who has the best possibility to capitalize on those storms? I showed you those areas and the way the models are pinpointing. I don't have any real strong reason to disagree with that right now.
Yeah.
Once we get into the back part of this year and we see what happens with if there's going to be an El Nino develop, well, then there might be something that's better to talk about. Doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to have immediate and sustained relief, but boy, the pattern that's been reinforced here literally shut out parts of the Sierras in California during the month of January. That's a tough thing to break. So that's something that we at least have to recognize and at least prepare for.
Right. So yeah, I'll give anyone another chance here to ask some questions, and if not, we'll close up shop here. Does anybody have another question they'd like to ask?
Yeah, I've got one more question. With
Sure.
regards to the next update, we'll email and we'll be able to follow along just like this in a month.
So I'm not sure what the plans are. Brian, you actually might know better than I do how often we're going to do these webinars, but we will still be putting out the videos and passing along forecast information that we receive. And so just make sure you get with your agent so that he knows you're expecting that, or she, because we do get them. They do send them to all the agents, and so that, yeah, we'll be updating this. It may not be, Brian, do you know how often they're planning the webinar?
The webinars I don't know, but I do the monthly videos. So this will
Yeah.
essentially count, for a monthly video that agents can export to their clients and whatnot. And if
Yeah.
there's more of a interest in making this more of a webinar thing versus the videos, I'm totally open to something like that. So speak with your agent, and we can see what we can do to make that happen.
Okay. And I think any conversation I have had has been quarterly on a webinar type deal, and that's not definitive, but that's what I've heard. So, but yeah, if you're not getting this information from your agent, make sure they know you want it.
Okay. Well,
Let's see. Just all right. Whoever was just asking that question, go ahead again. You broke up for a minute.
yeah. So I definitely like the webinar idea. It's great to have Brian where we can access him. I think in this particular case, there's not a lot. I mean, it's pretty definitive, but as we get further along in the year, there could be some real nuances coming up. So I appreciate.
Yeah, thank you for that feedback. And I was going to say, anybody who has feedback, including those of you who are watching this later, we're recording this, and give us feedback on what you liked and what more you'd like to see, because this is for you. And so we want to make sure we're providing what is most beneficial to you. So is there anyone else who'd like to speak up for a minute?
Access to tonight's presentation. How do we get it to us so we can, like, look at the slides and
Okay.
etc.
Yeah, I'll make sure that they know. I'm assuming the plan is to send out a link to the recording.
Okay.
And also, as well as we usually get some of the maps and stuff. So I'll put a note here just to talk to them, make sure that we're getting that out there. But I'm assuming that's the plan, is to send out a link.
Awesome. Thanks for the update and for helping us do what we do.
Yeah, stay strong, guys. I mean, it's not the best news, but at least you're ahead of the curve. There's a lot of folks out there that are gonna all of a sudden be trying to make decisions in July when it's too late to be making decisions. So I'm not saying run out and knee-jerk react right now, but at least you're thinking. You can maybe identify some, whatever crop residue or something you can go to if your rangeland doesn't last. So all right, if there's no more questions, I'm going to go ahead and end. And Brian, thanks again for this. And everybody watch for maybe a link, and then of course updates for next month.
Thank
You
you.
bet, guys. Take care.